Good day, and welcome to another episode where we've got one of the, I will call it the king of Immigration New Zealand or the mogul of Immigration New Zealand, someone who gave me life in New Zealand by getting me residency 19 years back. And he has been an immigration lawyer from 1997. We see a lot of people who are talking about immigration, about policies, but someone who lives and breathes policies day in, day out, and knows the why behind why a policy is made, and knows why it can help someone get a better result. Well, I would not speak much, but welcome our guest today, who is none other than Alastair McClymont, who is the principal of Alastair McClymont Law, and now in the recent merger, where they've got language capabilities and two big immigration people to come together, where Alastair McClymont and Saif Sheikh have come together to create a new firm, which is McClymont Sheikh Law, that is for immigration and making sure that everybody gets the best of all the worlds and your immigration matters can be resolved in the best, most apt advice for your individual self. Thank you so much, Alastair, for coming in and joining us. I'll leave it to you.
Thanks very much for your kind introduction, Dave. And yes, we did have a chat about that earlier, about 19 years ago.
Yes.
And I think that this is the one thing that I enjoy the most about the 27 years of doing this work is meeting people that we helped decades ago and seeing how they've adapted and become successful, and kids have grown up and they've become successful. It's the greatest reward in this job. Is seeing people like yourself doing so well and settling it so well. So I'm really happy to be here and talk about my favourite subject. No, not cricket, but about immigration. So, things have changed a lot in 27 years. And, I started off just, processing applications like yours. But, now my, focus is really on immigration policy, and this is really what I'm hoping that you and I can chat about today is about immigration policy and try and help some of your viewers and listeners out there understand how policy is made and why we have immigration policies.
That's amazing. So you've actually given me a segue for my first two questions.
I did that deliberately.
Yeah. So please answer that why do we have an immigration policy?
Well, let me ask you a question. What do you think immigration policy means? When I say to you immigration policy, what do you think that means?
For me, immigration policy means that if somebody wants to come to New Zealand, or New Zealand government decides that who do they want to give entry to this country and grow this country. Am I right or wrong?
Yeah, well, everyone's going to have a different answer to the question.
Yeah, amazing. So I'm not wrong.
It really depends on who you talk to.
Yeah.
Because immigration policy could be the document which sets out what the rules are for someone to be granted a visa. Immigration policy could be what the lay person, the ordinary person who's applying, what they think is right or wrong. Immigration policy could be the person on the street who has no involvement with immigration, and you ask them what immigration policy is, and they're going to think something completely different. Immigration policy could be what the Prime Minister and the ministers sit around the cabinet table and they're talking about what kind of policies they need to develop. And for them, immigration policy is just a tool in larger economic and social policies. So by asking you the question, what I'm sort of trying to show is that everybody sees that immigration policy as being something different. And I think the point that I'd like to make today is that in order to be successful either in your own application or to understand what's going on in the immigration area, you need to understand that there are lots of different views of what immigration policy actually is and what it means and how it operates. And then perhaps we can talk about some of those today.
Why not? So what is our current immigration policy? Because we had a change in government fairly recently, and we'll go in the past later because it's past. But I want to talk about 1997, first 1997 immigration policy till 2024. What are the massive major changes you've seen in New Zealand immigration policy? I know it was anyone could come, 1997, anyone could come with point system, the floodgates are open, then things changed. So take me on a quick run or a Reader's Digest version of New Zealand immigration from 1997 till 2024.
Well, one of the things you've got to do is you've got to look at the history of immigration in New Zealand and see how that's changed.
Okay.
So, before 1987, immigration policy was focused on particular nationalities.
Okay.
Then when the Immigration Act was passed in 1987, they got rid of that distinction between different nationalities, and that's when they tried to create a sort of more neutral type of policy which didn't focus on the social aspect of bringing in certain nationalities. But when I started in 97, we still had very low numbers of migrants from India and China, which is now our major markets. And the types of migrants that are coming in will change over time depending on what's happening in the world. So we're going from being mostly United Kingdom-based migrants, and then in the early 90s, when with the end of apartheid in South Africa, Nelson Mandela came president, we had an influx of South African migrants during those 1990s periods. You find things like the coups in Fiji, 87 and 2000 have influxes of Fijian migrants, but in around the time that you came, early 2000s, we had a huge influx of migrants from India. And then that ended up sort of changing. The government at the time decided that there were too many migrants coming from India. There was pushback against it, and they had to cancel all of the applications. Then we started having huge numbers coming in from China, and we had huge numbers coming in from Philippines, and then now we're seeing reductions in the numbers from attempts to reduce the numbers coming from India in particular. India is no longer in favour. So that's one of the biggest changes, is the nationalities, which often reflects what's happening in the world. But then of course you've also got the other problems about when we have a shortage of workers, or when we have high net migration, and then immigration policy is a response to that. So I'll give you, two examples. In 2016-17, we had very high net migration, a lot of people coming in, so the policy was really designed to reduce those numbers. Then on the other hand, when the Australian economy is doing really well, lots of New Zealanders are going to Australia for work to earn higher money. We suddenly have shortages of workers, and we need to bring people in. So there's this current sort of push and pull of too many people, too few people, too many, not the right numbers. We're always going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And a lot of that is just because of the nature of New Zealand. We're at the bottom of the world. We're right next to Australia, which is like a magnet that pulls skilled people towards it. So there are all of these influences that affect how policy is made, amongst a lot of other things.
But that's brilliant that you give me a snapshot of a lot of stuff. My question to you is that in the government, we got a lot of people, a lot of educated, a lot of people, CEOs and this and that, and immigration. Everybody's like top notch, and I highly regard everybody. I have a question. Why can't we ever strike a balance in immigration? Why is it influx, outflux, going to Australia? Why can't we retain talent or get good talent and put policies around getting good talent to our country? Why do we have to just keep on opening, losing, and then crying later on?
Well, there's a couple of things. One, where New Zealand is very unique in the Western world because people with New Zealand residency, New Zealand citizenship have immediate access to Australia. Australia offers higher wages. So you're always going to have this pull away of people and skills away from New Zealand into Australia, unless the Australian economy tanks. And when that happens, then New Zealanders return back to New Zealand. You don't have so many New Zealanders going to Australia, and that brings up the net migration rate. And that's one thing that the media doesn't mention when they talk about net migration. When they try and scare people with net migration figures, they don't explain that net migration is it's an equation with the number of people coming in plus the number of people going out equals net migration. They only tell one part of the story in the media, because you've got a 2-minute news story and they talk about we've got record high net migration, all these people coming in from India and China. What they don't say is that the reason the net migration is high is because New Zealanders are flooding to Australia to work, right? And that makes net migration high, artificially high sometimes. So, that's one of the things which is unique about New Zealand that other Western countries don't have. But the other reality is that although we're a Western country and there's a higher standard of living for people who come from, say, a lot of the Asian countries, for example, we don't offer very high wages in terms of other countries. So there's a disconnect with policymakers and politicians who believe New Zealand is this incredibly attractive destination that everyone in the world wants to come to. But the reality is that a lot of people want to migrate for economic reasons, and they can't make that much money here in New Zealand, and the cost of living is high. So we're not getting the best of the best. The best of the best are going to go to Canada or Australia or the United States or the United Kingdom. But the policymakers seem to believe that we have this clean, green image that the whole world wants to come here. But that's not the reality. The vast majority of migrants want to come for economic reasons. They don't want to come here because it's clean and green and there's mountains and lakes and forests. That's a very small number. Most people are coming here to have a better future for their children, for education, and to make more money. And we struggle to compete against other Western countries. So we're always, following these other countries and trying to attract people, and we struggle a lot of the time. And quite often, the very best of the best come, get the residency, and then they go to Australia, where they're going to make more money.
Well, that's there. Obviously, media doesn't pick up a lot of stuff. But let's come to present day. What are the existing, or what are the policies now which are different from last year, and why are these policies being made for what? What does this government want to achieve with immigration and then tenure, which is next 3 years? Right. What do they want to achieve, and what policies are they trying to make? And how does it impact our viewers or listeners or a common man?
So what sort of happens when a new government comes in?
Yeah.
Is either they've got a strong policy idea that they want to implement, or immigration is seen as just a tool of the greater economic policy, right? So when the Labor government came in 2017, they had a couple of strong ideological positions that they wanted to push with their immigration policy changes. At the moment we've come in, we haven't seen any evidence of anything like that. We haven't seen any statements from the government saying, look, we want to do something really new and transformational in terms of immigration policy. So for the last 6 months, it's really just treading water. We have got this older policies that were put in place by the previous government, and it's just being tinkered with around the edges. There's a couple of band-aids being put on here, and they're sort of tying it up with a bit of string so it doesn't fall apart, and you're trying to do... We haven't seen anything major. There's really no evidence of anything significant that this new government wants to do at all in terms of immigration policy. But there are a number of reasons for this. We have an immigration minister who also is the education minister, and her priority is clearly on education. We have a coalition government where there is a complete variety of views on immigration. Okay, you've got National, you've got ACT, and you've got New Zealand First. New Zealand First takes a very populist immigration position, the sort of one that you would see with Donald Trump, or with the Brexit people, in countries like in Le Pen in France, these sorts of things. It's, we don't want migrants in this country. New Zealanders for New Zealanders. That's what New Zealand First is. So you've got that populist strain sitting around the cabinet table. And you've got ACT Party, who are primarily a libertarian party. A libertarian party is one that says, well, we should have as little government intervention as possible. We should have a free market, which includes a free market of labour. So migrants, should be able to come and go, and let the market decide. So you have all of these different influences. And of course you have the business people talking to, National and ACT all the time. We need people, we need people, we need people. Well, you've got New Zealand First saying, we don't want people, we don't want people. Now, policy is made by Cabinet, all right? Policy is not made by Immigration New Zealand. Policy is made with a Cabinet decision. Yes, the Minister makes the policy, but it has to be agreed on by the Cabinet. And the Cabinet includes 3 political parties who have quite different views on immigration. So when we don't see any major transformational changes, that's primarily the reason, is because you're not going to get them to agree. So, the problem is that with a coalition government, we might end up being stuck with 3 years with nothing happening. And that's not necessarily the fault of Immigration New Zealand. It's not necessarily the fault of the Immigration Minister. It's the fault of the voters who decided that they needed a 3-way coalition between people who had completely different views on immigration.
Well, that's the nature of the beast, because it happened, when the red and the black came together the first time, when National did win, but they couldn't win the Kingmaker. Yeah. I call NZ First the Kingmakers.
Yeah, well, that's a really good example. I mean, when Labor and New Zealand First were in coalition in 2017,
yes,
you then had a situation where Labor really had to adopt a much more of a populist immigration policy which was completely different from the Labour Party tradition. I mean, traditionally, the Labour Party was the party of the migrants. But in order for them to be elected and to go into coalition with New Zealand First, they then had to take on a much more populist strand. And what they're basically doing is selling, Trumpian immigration policy in a populist way, not to the, like in America with the sort of working class, blue collar workers, but to the Labour Party supporters who are generally urban, white, middle class, educated liberals. You have to sell that sort of populist anti-immigrant strain to them, which is the Labour Party base. So that's when you have all this talk about Chinese people buying too many houses and they're destroying the housing market and it's the infrastructure can't cope and there's too many cars on the motorway. That's just another way of saying migrants are stealing our jobs, which is what you'd have a Donald Trump saying. But it's the same thing. It's a populist, xenophobic immigration policy. And New Zealand First are back. So, we've still got the same problem. While we have New Zealand First in the government, we're always going to have these same problems.
Until they have a majority or something changes.
Well, Labour did have a complete majority, of course, but they did nothing.
They did nothing. They just built up a hole of $93 billion of just COVID money.
In terms of immigration policy, they could have done anything.
Yes.
Once they had that complete majority, and instead they just did nothing. They carried on with an ideological program that they had and created back from 2016, which just turned out to be a complete disaster. And that populist strain within the Labour Party, which is something that was never seen before. You would have never have seen that under a Helen Clark government, for example. But then you did, with Jacinda Ardern as the Prime Minister.
I have a question on that. Why do we need immigration? I mean, let's talk about the three parties, and let's talk about three approaches to this, to our country, New Zealand.
Well, when you say why do you need immigration, I'll give you three countries as an example of really big problems that are going to happen in the future. Japan, China, South Korea. They're three very wealthy countries.
Yeah.
They really have no immigration policy whatsoever.
Yeah.
You just cannot migrate and settle in those countries.
Yeah.
Now, as those countries become wealthier, people have less children and the population ages. Each one of these three countries now, the bulk of the population is getting older and older and older and older. So they're not being replaced by the young people because, when you're wealthy, you don't have very many children. If you're a couple, that's two people. The average children you have is about 1.2, 1.3 children. You're not replacing the population. So you've got an aging population. They don't work. They're not productive because they're retired. You've got young people that don't want to do these sorts of jobs and, the sort of unskilled type jobs, the factory jobs, or caring for the elderly people.
Yep.
And these countries are facing an existential crisis in the next generation.
Yep.
That's why you need immigration. And the long-term future for countries like Japan and South Korea and even China is now really worrying. I mean, you look at what happened to China. They got rid of the one-child policy and said everyone can have as many children as they want. And what are the young people doing? They're still not having children because they don't need to.
Exactly.
Because they have the money for living a comfortable lifestyle. And now you get the Chinese government going, oh my God, what the hell are we going to do? As the Japanese and the South Koreans. So that's why you need immigration. You've got to replace the young people because it's the young people who are economically productive, who create the wealth for the country. Because when you've got a wealthy, older population, once they hit 65, they're no longer productive. But they expect their superannuation payments. Well, who's going to work to make the money for the government to pay for the superannuation?
Exactly.
Migrants. And as we said before, even more so in New Zealand, because in addition to the low birth rates, you have Australia acting as a magnet, pulling young people away to work. So we desperately need immigration to survive.
True. I mean, and that's a brilliant answer. And the next thing is that, you talked about Chinese stealing the properties, spoiling the market. Did we really have that problem in our country?
No, of course we didn't. Because I think completely made up for election purposes.
Exactly.
I mean, the thing is that, my experience, and you've probably seen the same, that yes, there were Chinese people buying properties, but they were not people in China buying properties. They were New Zealand citizens of Chinese descent or residents of Chinese descent. Why do they put their wealth into property? Because traditionally they don't trust the banks, because in China the banks are owned by the government and the government can just do whatever they like, including taking all your savings. So you don't save your money in the bank, you put it into property. That's what was happening. And when you talk to people who are doing conveyancing work in the Chinese community, and you say to them, all these people buying houses, are these old people in China that are coming over on visitors visas? They go, no, they're all New Zealand citizens. So when Labour Party were saying, Chinese-sounding surnames buying all the property, well, yes, they're right, but what they're actually doing is just creating this anti-Chinese hatred, this populist xenophobia against people, trying to create this fear that foreigners are coming and stealing our assets and stealing our houses, which is completely untrue, which is exactly the same as what Donald Trump does and what happens with Brexit, which is what's happening in France now, where they say migrants are stealing our jobs. Migrants don't steal jobs. They've never stolen jobs. But that's how you get votes from people who don't think about immigration policy properly.
Amazing. And so basically, we got the fact that, migrants are important. Now, my next question is, what are the misconceptions we face in our world of immigration?
Well, this is connected in some way, because as I said at the beginning, to really understand how decisions are made and why decisions are made, you need to understand the purpose of the policy behind it.
Yeah.
So, as I said, when I asked you at the beginning, what is immigration policy? An immigration officer at a very junior level who's going to be processing your visa application is going to say, immigration policy are these rules written down here. There's a bunch of boxes that need to be ticked. I'm going to go and tick those boxes and make a decision. That's what immigration policy is for them. But when policy is made, there's an objective to that policy. There's a reason why that policy exists. Now, if you're advocating for a client, like we do, and you see something coming from an immigration officer that is not helpful for your client, you've got to think about what the bigger picture is. You've got to think about the objectives behind this particular policy. And a lot of people don't understand that. They'll just say, oh, well, it's not fair. The decision's not fair, or the immigration officer's not being fair to me. Well, perhaps that's because the government doesn't want the immigration officer to give these particular visas for some reason. So let's look at a couple of examples. Let's say you've got a student coming here from India who wants to study a level 4 course, right? Now, if you look at the rules, you might say, yeah, they meet this. They've got the offer of place, they've got the finances, they don't have a criminal conviction. Yes, they tick all the boxes. But the reality is that the government doesn't want them, all right? So there are other things hidden in the policy, which is a tool that can be used to decline that person simply because of what those greater objectives are. And if you don't understand what those objectives are, if you don't understand what the purpose of the policy is, then quite often you're not going to be able to win the case or advocate on behalf of the clients. And that's really what my job is to look at an application, look at what Immigration New Zealand is doing and saying, well, okay, what are we trying to do here? What's the immigration officer trying to do? Is the immigration officer meeting those objectives? Is this someone that the government actually wants in the country? Or is this application one that was never going to be approved because they just simply don't want these sort of people? And a lot of that is because of the nationalities and the bigger reasons. And you have to understand this bigger picture in order to actually get the result you want and to advise people correctly. Another example, if someone's going to come, someone's here from, say, Somalia, and they want their parents to come over and visit. We know that they're not going to get a visitor's visa because they're from Somalia. Now, the immigration policy doesn't say people from Somalia can't get visas, but we know what the purpose of visitor's visa policy is, and we know what the government are afraid of, and when you know these things, you know that that person's not going to get a visa. So you've got to understand the bigger picture, and you've got to understand the objectives.
So if somebody wants to come from Somalia and they approach you to get a visitor visa, can you get them a visitor visa?
I would say to them, you have to make the decision whether you want to proceed with this. These are the risks, and this is what we think is likely to happen. You decide whether or not you want to take that risk or not. And you leave it to the client to decide, but they have to be fully informed. And the problem with a lot of people who either do the applications themselves or will pay someone to do the application is that they're not fully informed of all the risks because they don't understand the bigger picture. A person might say, oh yes, you can get a visa because it says here that anyone from any country can come on a visitor's visa if they apply, as long as they have a sponsor. You've got a sponsor, therefore apply for a visitor's visa. Right? That's when you look at the policy. If you look at the subtext of the policy, you read between the lines and you understand the bigger picture, they're not going to give you a visitor's visa because you're from Somalia, And the reason for that is because they know that the minute that person arrives in this country, they're going to make a claim for refugee status, and they're probably going to be successful, which is going to cost the New Zealand government about $200,000 over their lifetime. That's why they're not going to get a visitor's visa. But clients are not told these things.
Amazing. Well, I've got some, because as you speak conversationally, there are too many questions brimming up in my head, is that you talk about skilled versus unskilled labor. As what I gauge and read between the lines of what you're saying, we need both.
Mm-hmm.
We need skilled, we need unskilled.
Yes.
Right? In terms of attracting the right talent from the world, let's say for a day you are given the choice to choose. What kind of skilled migrants would you want to get in New Zealand? And unskilled, from which part of the world do you want?
Yeah. Well, everyone agrees that there are certain occupations that we really desperately need in this country.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to deny it.
Yeah.
The doctors, the nurses, the IT engineers, all of those sorts of people, okay?
Yeah.
Leave them aside because there's no dispute about it whatsoever, okay? Where the dispute happens is in what do you define by skilled? What do you think skilled means?
I thought skilled means someone who knows, like a doctor, a nurse, what we need. Someone skilled like a plumber, electrician, someone who knows a job of doing certain things is skilled for me.
So the Accredited Employer Work Visa scheme was supposed to enable employers to access skills from overseas, but people were coming in to do cleaning in motels and to make beds and these sorts of jobs. So how is that possible then?
I don't know. You tell me, why was that possible? Because that really created a lot of...
Yeah, so that's around the definition of what you mean by skilled. Mm-hmm. So the conversation that the New Zealand public has around immigration is saying we need skills, but the reality is that we just need people to work. But how do you manage that whilst trying to tell the general population that immigration policy is to bring the best of skilled people, while the reality is that you desperately need unskilled people just to do the most basic work possible? And there are some things that you cannot talk about in public. You cannot talk about the fact that employers will always say that it's difficult to recruit New Zealanders for certain jobs. You just won't get it. I'll give you an example of my own personal life. Okay, when I was at high school and at university, when I wanted to make money in the holidays, I would go onto the kiwi fruit orchards in the Bay of Plenty, and I would, prune kiwi fruit vines and at that time they were full of students like me working in the orchards to make some money. Now, you go down to the orchards now in the Bay of Plenty, you tell me how many university students you're going to find in the orchards doing work.
Probably none.
There's none, because they all want to be DJs and baristas now, right?
Yeah.
So the nature of the labour market changes. So you can no longer get those sort of students to come and do the work. And if I asked my father what he did when he was in university, he was working on farms, he was, baling hay, he was doing these sorts of things. You're never going to find a student going anywhere near a farm nowadays, unless there's a DJ booth or a coffee machine, right? So the nature of the work changes. So how do you then get that work done without getting people in from overseas missions? You got people on working holiday visas, yes, that's great, but that's only going to account for maybe 20% of it. What we had previously was international students. But then the nature of the international student market changed, and we suddenly didn't have those people anymore. But we had this huge gap in the labour market where there was nobody to work, and you had to fill it with something. And then out of desperation, government opens the doors, all these people come in, and there's all sorts of problems. And part of the reason was because we're not allowed to have this discussion in public about the fact that the country just needs unskilled workers, because you're not allowed to talk about these things. And I've had politicians tell me over lunch, off the record, and they will say, yes, we know this and we understand this, but we're not allowed to say it.
But why are they not allowed to say it? Why can't you call a potato a potato?
Well, you have to ask the politicians this.
Well, I'm not a politician.
No politician is going to come on here and say, look, the problem is that New Zealanders just don't want to do this job. So we have a whole immigration policy which is designed around this idea that New Zealanders are all standing in line wanting to do every single job available, whereas everyone knows that that's not the case. So can you imagine how disconnected immigration policy is going to be when you have the reality over here, but the public narrative is completely different? And then you have to have an immigration policy which fits both of those. Because one of the purposes of immigration policy is so that voters every 3 years think the government is doing the right thing. And if you have a public narrative which is we need to protect job opportunities for New Zealanders, then they're going to vote for the political party that has an immigration policy that seems to be doing that. Whereas the reality on the ground is completely different.
So, Alastair, as per the, as what you see, the disconnect between the public perception and the policy, all we wanted was people to come into our country and work. Where did it go wrong that did this immigration change became a business of exploitation?
Yeah, well, if we're talking about this new AEWV policy, which is causing all of these problems over the last 6 months or so, you have to sort of track back as to why there was a policy change. So, back in 2016-17, the exploitation problem was primarily around students, okay? And there were other reasons why there was exploitation of students, but those international students who were coming in were often doing that sort of unskilled work while they were studying or after they finished studying and they're on their work visas. They were doing that sort of unskilled work, and they all had English language tests that they'd passed. They had all had New Zealand qualifications that they were either studying or had completed, so they had a particular education level and a particular English language level. Then the Labour government came in and they wanted to get rid of a lot of those international students, or what they called the lower quality students. So they brought the student numbers right down, and then COVID hit and it was reduced even further. And then the students who were on work visas that were stuck overseas during that March-April period, they were locked out. So it was reduced even further. Okay, and all of a sudden, then once the COVID had gone and the borders were open, there were no workers anymore because all those people had gone. See, and businesses were going, we have to have people. Well, the economy's going to tank. We need people. So all of a sudden they said, okay, we're just going to open the floodgates. We're going to let everyone in. That's what they call the light touch that they took. The light touch was anybody applies for a visa, just hand out the visas like candy. All right? But previously, the people doing these jobs, they had English language tests, they had New Zealand qualifications, they were at that level. The people coming in had none of that. People coming in had no English. They had no qualifications. They just had nothing. And they're the most vulnerable and the most easily exploited. So you get that. Then you get bad policy design where, the Immigration New Zealand had a situation where they could not process these applications at the pace required. They just didn't have the staff. They didn't have the ability to do it. So they just said, okay, let's just change the way that we do this, that rather than checking everything and verifying everything, we'll put the onus on the employers to be honest. So we'll let the employers make a self-declaration that they're a good employer. And then when they self-declare that they're a good employer, we're going to give them 30 job check tokens to bring in all the workers that they need. Not even realizing that those employers who are not financially sustainable, who don't have good records, who lied when they made their declarations, are then going to go and sell those job check tokens on the open market and make an absolute fortune. There were people that were making up to $500,000 within a few months by selling job check tokens. And do they care that there's some sort of investigation going on? No, of course not. They just go to Australia like everybody else. And that's what's happened to most of them. They just got packed up and gone to Australia with their money. And meanwhile, Immigration New Zealand investigators are going to be investigating these people for 5 years. Finally, they're going to build a case against them, and they're saying, right, we're ready to lay charges, and oh, whoops, they've gone to Australia. It's just an absolute dog's breakfast. It's a complete and total mess. But there are a number of factors that influenced it. And now the new government is basically stuck with it. And these people that came in when the floodgates were open are going to be here for decades. I see clients coming to my office who came in same time that you came in 20 years ago, and they've been an overstayer ever since.
Ever since. And even after the Labour policy of making everybody residents, didn't make them residents.
Well, they didn't. You had to meet their criteria. I mean, the policy that Labour brought in for that 2021 residence visa policy, you needed to be on a visa. Yeah. It wasn't an amnesty for overstayers. But, we still get people coming in who are saying, I came in 2001, my visitor's visa expired 2 months later, and I've been an overstayer ever since.
And they're still surviving.
And that's what's going to happen with this influx. These people are going to be here forever. Because for a lot of those people, paying $30,000 for a work visa meant that they had an opportunity of trying to create something for themselves. The only way that they will ever repay that $30,000 they paid for that visa is by working in a Western country for decades. Not 6 months. Now, If the government at the time had come and asked anyone in the industry, what do you think would happen if we had this policy? Every single person in the industry would have said, this is going to be a complete disaster.
Don't do it.
Don't do it. The New Zealand Law Society Immigration Committee, they told Immigration New Zealand, they told the minister, don't do it, it's going to be a disaster. What did they do? They ignored all the advice because the Labour Party came in and they had this ideology of, we know best. We don't need to talk to immigration experts. We know best. This is what we're going to do because it fits in with our ideology. And then you have one minister coming in with that ideology. You have the second minister under the Labour government coming in who just actually didn't care less about immigration. Then you had someone coming in who's said, okay, well, I'm going to go and talk to people in the community, but he only wanted to talk to people in the community that were card-carrying Labour Party members. If they weren't a member of the Labour Party, he didn't want to talk to them. By the time Andrew Little come in, he had about 2 months left, and he clearly looked at this and said, oh my God, this is just, oh my God, what a disaster. We're going to have an independent inquiry, but I won't tell the media, but I'm going to make sure that the independent inquiry doesn't look at the immigration policy. They're only going to look at how the policy is implemented so that the Labour Party doesn't look bad. So nothing happened.
Do you believe in amnesty, you think?
Well, there
given
are pros and cons for an amnesty, and there are arguments on both sides. It doesn't work as a deterrent for people. It creates an incentive for people to then to overstay. People then say, right, if I just hang in there for a bit longer, there's going to be another amnesty at some time. But I thought that at COVID, it was a perfect time for an amnesty because we talked about the people that were unlawful for 20 years.
Yeah.
One of the reasons they remain unlawful for 20 years is that they keep their head down and they're under the radar. They don't get bank accounts, they don't go to government departments. So during COVID, when they wanted everybody to be vaccinated, and the big fear was a COVID outbreak, particularly in South Auckland, large numbers of people living in garages, that's the time that you wanted all these people to come out and say, hey, here I am, this is who I am, I'm going to get vaccinated. But these people are not going out and getting vaccinated because they're terrified. And then the government said, no, there's no risk, but you don't trust governments. I mean, you get politicians that lie to you all the time. Why all of a sudden you're going to trust them to tell you the truth? So that was the time to have an amnesty because there was a good one-off reason for it. It's a COVID epidemic. We just need to make sure that everybody is registered, that everybody's vaccinated, that everybody's safe. We can have a completely clean slate here. We can just put everyone on an even playing field. We can tidy up everything. They missed their opportunity.
And that's, Alastair, what I hear from you, all the discussion we've had so far, the frustration. And I think that's a frustration a lot of people carry, that here we are voting in a government, giving, there's a lot of taxpayer money, there's so much of waste of money which goes in all this. And if you need unskilled labor, you open the floodgate, you say, okay, this is what we need, this is a minimum requirement. You need to have minimum English. Mm-hmm. This is what we need from you. And you look at countries where it's overpopulated, India, China, not China anymore, other countries like Philippines or low socioeconomic places, they would definitely come for a long-term vision to stay and make a life for themselves. And that could be shown in the sense, okay, go do some hard work. Do your basic IELTS first. Yeah. And the country is going to open a gate for unskilled people who at least can speak English.
Yes.
Can do the basic job. Yes. Could be a cleaner, could be anything else.
So one of the things that the current policy is fixated on, well, two things. One thing is university degrees. Mm-hmm. Anyone who's been to university will tell you that a university degree tells you nothing about how successful a person's going to be in their life.
Exactly.
But the other thing that they're obsessed about is having these skilled job offers, right? Do you even remember what skilled job offer you had when you applied 19 years ago? Of course not. Because the thing that makes migrants successful is not their university qualification, it's not their skilled job offer when they applied, it's that drive that they have, it's that entrepreneurial spirit, it's that enthusiasm
to do something and be something.
They've got an opportunity to make something for their life. They've come to a country where there are no barriers. Okay?
Yes.
A lot of people come from countries where if you want to get promoted somewhere, you need to pay a bribe to someone. If you want to get a job in a government department, you pay a bribe to someone. In order to get into a right university, you need to know someone and then sort of pay them a bribe. If you're a woman, you don't get the position because you're a woman. If you've got a disability, you're going to be, all these types of things. Whereas they want to come to a country where it's an even playing field, where everybody has an opportunity. And when you come to a country like that and you have that opportunity, you have that drive
to do it.
Now you look at what happens to the refugees that come in. Okay, you get people complain about refugees as being, going on welfare benefits, and all this sort of stuff. The second generation of the refugee families that come in will almost always be the doctors and the engineers and the IT experts and the most highly productive people you can possibly imagine, because they've come from a family background where they know that things can go really bad really fast. They can be persecuted because of their religion, of their race, their ethnicity, anything. But now they have an opportunity to succeed, and they grasp that opportunity and they work hard, and they will achieve that. It's that drive which makes a migrant successful. But the politicians and the policymakers, they don't recognize that. They think it's all about you have to have a degree from a university and you have to have a skilled job offer. It's crazy. Half the people that get residency with a skilled job offer, they quit straight afterwards and they go into business for themselves, and they become 100 times more successful than if they'd stayed in their job, and that they create wealth and that they create jobs like you've done. All right? So you're the perfect example. That's what makes a successful migrant. But the policymakers, they're oblivious to this. They just have no idea that this is what makes a successful migrant. But a part of that is because of the public perception.
But why is this such a disconnect in policymakers? They're human beings like us, and they're saying this, you got 5 million population. Why can't they just get in? Why can't immigration or immigration ministers just do the hard work of, listening to people? Because what they do is they'll create a committee, and someone who's just a loudmouth speaks on there, make someone the chairman do something. But they don't want to listen to people on the ground.
Yeah.
Go to the shops, ask them what are their pain points, go to people and check their pain points, and then create a policy which will be beneficial for your own country. And you said exactly, what you said is that, if you are giving self-declaration, check the worthiness of an employer.
Yeah.
What are their accountants doing? What are they doing for the government? How much taxes have they paid? Are they paying taxes on time? Are they paying GST on time? Are these people worthy enough to be employers? Mm-hmm. This could have been a cleanup drive and also an immigration drive together.
But if you think about what are the motivations here, so you've got the politicians who are elected, they're motivated by wanting to be elected again,
yes.
Right? Then you've got businesses. What are they motivated by? They're motivated by wanting to make profit, so they want workers. But what are the civil servants motivated by? The people in Wellington who make the policy, what are their motivations? A lot of the time, their motivations are around the budget that they have. How can they achieve their KPIs at the cheapest possible cost? So that's why they go into things like automating decision makings. They try and have as few staff as possible, that they want to have this light touch where they don't actually go and verify things, so that they can have quicker processing times, so that they can meet the KPIs for as little expenditure as possible. Now you've got a government that wants to cut back their costs in all the government departments, so they're just constantly looking for shortcuts to meet their budget. So when you get a situation where you have a minister who is completely indifferent to what's going on in his ministry, and we're talking about the current AEWV policy here, this is exactly what happened, is that you have first a minister coming in with this ideology that they're going to solve migrant worker exploitation. He asked the civil servants to create a policy. The civil servants think, okay, well, how can we make the minister happy, but in reality, we're going to make a policy which is going to enable us to process more applications quicker at a cheaper cost. They then give the policy back to the new minister, who knows nothing about immigration, has no concept of how it works in reality, and goes, oh yeah, that's fine, we'll do that, and we'll just tick that off and sign up. And that's how you end up with a complete disaster. So everyone has a different motivation for creating the policy, and there's that disconnect. So it's really the civil servants in Immigration New Zealand who control the policy here, because the ministers generally know nothing about it, or they don't care. No. So the civil servants run it, and they have a different motivation than everybody else. If, for a miracle, we have a minister who finally understands everything exactly, then they can know when the civil servants are lying to them, and the civil servants will lie to the minister frequently, okay? So the minister can have the power to say, no, I don't want this. This is what I want. Do it properly. Do it the way I want it, okay? But that minister is only going to do what the cabinet wants, right? So the cabinet then has to balance the different political parties. each of those political parties then needs to be elected to stay in power. So it comes down to what the general population who vote, what they want. Now, human beings, my belief, are naturally xenophobic. If you have, I'll give you a good example. When you watch the TV news and there's a news story about a migrant, why is a white migrant called an expat and a brown migrant called a migrant? All right, that's how you have these public discussions, these public narratives around immigration are what cause people to then go and vote for who they want to vote for. So when they see, expats coming in, they think, oh yeah, the people like us. There's someone that I can go to a barbecue with my next door neighbour. We can have a couple of beers and we can talk about the rugby, right? That's a good migrant, not some brown person who eats some different type of food, who listens to some funny music and talks funny, all right? So there's that natural xenophobia that the New Zealand voter has against migrants. And these are the people that vote for the politicians. And the politicians then have to get re-elected. And they go into the cabinet and they make policy decisions. So their primary motivation is, what do the voters think? Now, if they're suddenly going to open up to a whole bunch of unskilled people who have come from countries like India and China and Philippines and these sorts of countries, what are the voters going to think? That's not what they want. They want white doctors from United Kingdom.
And they're not going to come. What are the current pathways where a migrant can really have, residency in New Zealand? Do there any pathways left?
It's very sort of common that I'll get emails or telephone calls or people come and see me and say, I want to migrate, or my brother wants to migrate, and they have an idea of what New Zealand wants, right? So they think, I can do this, I'm hardworking and I've got this, and maybe I'll have this sort of qualification, I've got this experience, New Zealand should be welcoming me with open arms. And then I have to say to them, well, actually, they're not, because you have to understand what the current policy is. What is it that New Zealand actually wants? What kind of people are they trying to attract? Whether it's right or wrong is not relevant, because the policy is the policy.
So what is the current policy, Alastair?
Well, it's basically a complete mess. It's what I said. There's an obsession with having university qualifications.
Okay.
There's an obsession with having a skilled job offer. There is a inability to define what skilled means, so they use this blunt instrument called ANSCO to determine skills, an instrument that was never designed for this purpose. It's a statistical tool. So you have bad tools, that you have this obsession with particular factors, which the reality is we all know doesn't really influence whether someone's going to be successful or not. And you have a bunch of policymakers who live and work in Wellington, a city of 300,000 people, where there is not large migrant communities compared to Auckland, who really don't understand how the migrant labour market works, how the migrant economy works. They don't understand that it's a different beast. So yes, there are people who will come and see me, and I know that this person is going to be a successful migrant, okay? I can meet someone, I know immediately they're going to be successful, but the policy doesn't fit that person. And you have to say to them, look, I think you're going to be great. I know that you're going to be successful and work hard, and you're going to, be a good parent for your kids, and you're going to obey all the laws, but the government doesn't want you because you don't have a master's degree in gender studies or whatever it is that they put value on nowadays. So
if today for being successful, if I have to come from overseas as a migrant and I've got a university degree, that gives me how much points? Like, if I got eligibility part 1 done?
They have this sort of 6-point thing where with a bachelor's degree you can get 3 points.
Okay.
And, you get postgraduate, you can have a master's degree at 5, a PhD at sort of 6 points, but then you've got to have New Zealand skilled work experience and a New Zealand skilled job offer.
And how do we get that?
Exactly. So you've got to come here to find a job offer, because the likelihood of getting a job overseas when you're overseas is relatively small, right? So you've got to come here. But to come here, you need to come on a visa, right? So what are you going to come on? A visitor's visa? Student visa? To get a work visa, you're going to need a job offer.
Yeah.
If you're going to come for a student visa, you might already have 3 postgraduate qualifications, but then you've got to come and study a 4th one that you don't even want to study, but you just want to get into the country. Or you're going to come on a visitor's visa. If you apply for a visitor's visa and say, I want to come to New Zealand because I want to look for a job, they're going to decline you, because that's not a genuine reason, according to policy, to visit the country. So what do? Only people can come are those on visa waiver countries. Who are the visa waiver countries? Well, they're almost all exclusively European countries. So a lot of it just depends on which country you're from. If I had a client who said, look, I'm from the United States and I got a qualification, I want to get a job, I would say, just jump on a plane. Just come over here. They'll give you a 6-month visa at the airport, and then just get your CV and just apply for a job. I can't say that to someone from India.
So if someone from the United States gets a job, do they have to have a job in their own field? Let's say someone who comes from a medicine industry, from medical background in USA, comes to New Zealand and works in a marketing department. Yeah. What do they do? Do they get still? They still get?
They're going to need to have a job offer.
Okay.
Either they're going to apply for residency straight with the job offer, or they're going to need to get a job offer so that they can start working, get skilled work experience, and then qualify. So you're going to need a job offer to get that work visa in the first place to work.
For 2 years.
For that, well, it could be 2, could be 1, could be 3, could be 6. It depends on what the qualifications and the job are.
Yeah.
But the reality is that you need a job offer.
Okay.
And for that, you need to have relevant qualifications or experience. So, yes, even though the residence policy doesn't say, well, this has to be relevant and this all has to match, the reality is that to get the work visa, you need to have those relevant qualifications and experience. You need to show that there's a shortage of New Zealanders, unless it's on a list of occupations which we know that there are shortages of. So you have to have that job offer to work. But as we said, that's not always, and often it's not, what determines whether or not someone's going to be a successful migrant. Because that person that comes from America maybe just wants to get a residence visa, and then they're going to stay for a little while and go, yeah, it's all right, but I'm not making much money. I may go back to America, or I might go over to Australia, right? I might go somewhere else. London. Someone that comes from a country like, so we'll say India again, who's got reasonable standard of English, reasonable experience. If they just give them a residence visa and come here, and they've got a young family, and they value education highly, they value sort of character issues highly, obey the law, pay your taxes, do all these sorts of things, they're going to be a much greater benefit to this country for generations than some American who's going to stay for a year and then head off somewhere else. But
absolutely,
policies don't match for those people.
But in terms of, I can stretch this interview, and for our viewers, we will be having Alastair probably on a monthly basis as per his time to discuss policies in detail. We'll take a visitor visa policy once, we'll take a migrant policy, and every time we'll discuss something, and some case studies as well for people to really get educated in this part. But if I'm in overseas, let's say non-visa waiver countries, and I have a university degree, and I apply for a job, and I get a genuine job offer, can I get a work visa?
Yeah, look, if you've got a genuine job offer, and if it's a job offer where you're either on a a green list of occupations, or if the employer has a job token that they can give to you, then yes, in theory, you can get that work visa. The reality, though, is somewhat different.
What's the reality?
Well, the reality is if you come from India, and if it's a really high-skilled job offer and highly paid job offer, you're going to be treated in a completely different way than if it's a relatively unskilled, lower-paid job offer. So if you're an IT engineer and you get a job offer, you're in Bangalore and you're working with Microsoft, and you get a job offer to come over here and you pay $220,000 as a project manager for Microsoft in New Zealand, you're not going to have any problems whatsoever, right? You get a job offer, you follow all the rules, you've got your job check token, and you're going to manage a store, or you're going to be looking after the cleaning or something like that. It's exactly the same rules are being applied, but you're going to be declined. Well, what's the difference? It's because you're relatively lower skilled, you're from India, Immigration New Zealand, the government don't want those sort of people, even though the policy says that you're eligible, so they will look for other reasons to decline you. So if you've applied for that sort of job, they will likely say, well, okay, you show me the employment contract, your tax records and your pay slips and your bank statements showing your salary into your bank account. You're saying, well, I don't have an employment contract, and I'm under the tax threshold in India, so I don't have tax documents. Immigration New Zealand are then going to say, well, we're unable to verify your work experience. The onus is on you to prove to us that you've got that work experience. We're not satisfied that you have sufficient documents to satisfy us that you're genuine, therefore your application's been declined. Completely lawful. Same policy in the two situations. One's approved and one's declined, and that's how they do it.
So it's basically they want cream to get all these jobs filled, but they don't want the unskilled part because they fill too many of them.
Yeah.
and now it's all about all those people who came in unskilled and all those job tokens which didn't have degrees and stuff. What is their future? They have to go back?
Well, some will go back, some will be deported, some will look for other avenues to
student visas.
Some will apply for, try and apply for student visas, but they're almost all being declined, those sort of people now, for the same sort of reasons we gave before. Some will make refugee claims because some advisor will, sell them a refugee claim, a bogus refugee claim template. Some will just, try and sort of get married to someone here to try and get a partnership category. Some will be here for 20 years.
Overstays. Yeah. Well, when I discuss with you today, and, in the end, I'll say that it's been eye-opening for me personally, because when you come in and you don't face these problems because you meet the right advisor. I was lucky enough to meet you and get on the right pathway, and didn't have much challenges. But people from my time are also overstays, and it also tells me that a lot of disconnect between policymakers and policy and the application of policy and the underlying unsaid truth.
Yep.
Between politics and, it's all about needs and wants kind of thing. Everybody wants something, and for that they satisfy the need. It could be cabinet, could be a minister, could be whatever. And somebody's trying to help someone, but at the end, they're all trying to help just themselves. And that doesn't help the community in a wider ways. All I'll say is that people who are, listening to this, viewing this, I would say that one, go to a right kind of advisor. Please check what kind of advice you're getting. Go to people who are experienced. I've got someone sitting. I'm not promoting a business, but I'm saying if I have to choose, I will choose someone of your experience and your talent and your caliber, because I know that I get a lot of experience of this country, right? And second, I also know someone who's genuinely, willing to do work for me for the why a policy was made.
Yeah.
And why do you not fit in the policy, and tell them the truth rather than just charging them a fee just for making or paying your bills.
Yes.
Rather than an immigration advisor is basically, his job is not just to, you charge money for a time, but it's a lot more, because you're saving someone's life, career, and making their future and their family's future. So it's very important. And I'll also say that I'll start this with Alastair, that probably we need to start getting people on board together who can actually genuinely think for the country, leaving their selfish need of money and career and all that, which should have been satisfied for them in their own jobs. But someone who can genuinely come together and tell the government, hey, we don't want anything. We don't want a position. We don't want a chair. All I want to tell you is that this is what is needed. And probably, Alastair, your role is not only as an immigration advisor, it's a lot more for a lot more people. And probably you should be talking to the government on a daily basis and telling them your advice, because we need such people like you to get this done. Thank you so much, Alastair,
Thank you very
for coming
much.
to our studio.
Great to be here.
God bless. Thank you.
Thank you.